Deadly sins, sloth, the sin of lack of action, punishment for being a sloth, being thrown into a snake pit. In Christian theology, sloth is not merely laziness or idleness. It's a spiritual vice defined as apathy or a deep spiritual and intellectual laziness that makes a person neglect their duties to God and others. It's a form of spiritual despair that leads to a lack of effort in pursuing virtue, spiritual growth, and the goods of one neighbor. It's a sadness or weariness of the soul in the face of spiritual good. The concept of sloth as a deadly sin has its root in early Christian monasticism. Evagrius Pontimus identified 8 evil thoughts, which later in the 6th century were adapted by Pope Gregory I. They're called deadly sins because they lead to other sins. It's a passive sin because it's something that you're not doing, a sin of omission. Uh, it destroys spiritual progress. Sloth is an active refusal to engage in the spiritual battle for one's soul, prevents a person from pursuing a relationship with God through prayer, worship, and study, causes a person to grow spiritually cold and indifferent, which is a state of spiritual death, leads to other sins, a capital vice. Sloth can lead to a host of other sins. Person who neglects their duties out of apathy may fall into despair, become irritable, or even engage in petty acts of revenge out of resentment for the demands of virtue. It rejects God's grace. Sloth is a rejection of God's grace and refusal to cooperate with it. God gives us gifts and a call to holiness, but sloth rejects that call and squanders those gifts out of apathy. It's a direct insult to God's love and generosity. Uh, Spiritual sadness and despair. Primary motives for sloth is a profound spiritual sadness known as acedia in early Christian theology, weariness or disgust with spiritual good. A person may be motivated by a feeling that the effort of a virtuous life is too difficult, that the rewards are too far away. This leads to a kind of spiritual despair where they feel that there's no point in trying to be a good person, pray, or even grow in their faith. That is the opposite of hope and joy. Pride and self-reliance. Sloth can be a subtle form of pride. Person might be unwilling to make an effort because they believe they're already good enough or do not need to work on their character. They also may be motivated by a refusal to depend on God's grace, believing they must do everything themselves. When they realize this is impossible, they may give up and become apathetic. Complacency, not wanting to grow, just sit in your cubicle and on your couch, and that's good enough. No, it's really not. Fear of failure. A person may be motivated to be slothful by a fear of failure. They might feel that if they try to do something, they will fail, so they do nothing to avoid that feeling. This could be seen as a person afraid to start a new project or take on a new responsibility because they're afraid they will not be good enough. This can also be a form of perfectionism, where a person is so afraid of not being perfect, they refuse to try at all. Or fear of success. Well, what if I succeed and I'll be in a responsible place and I'll be accountable to people and have people under me that I'm responsible for. Seeking comfort and avoidance. Final motive for sloth's pursuit of comfort and avoidance of effort. This is the more common modern understanding of sloth, where a person is simply unwilling to do anything that's difficult or demanding. They prefer to sit and watch TV than get up and exercise. They'd rather scroll through social media than read a book. This can also be seen in a person to avoid difficult conversations or responsibilities because they're afraid of the emotional, intellectual effort involved. To curb sloth, you must actively fight against spiritual apathy and laziness by cultivating discipline, taking on responsibility, and orienting your life towards powerful purpose. This process involves both spiritual and practical steps. Spiritual practices. Since sloth is a spiritual vice, it must be fought with spiritual tools. Pray and meditate on God's call to action. Instead of feeling hopeless, remind yourself that God calls you to a life of purpose and good works. Meditate on Bible verses that emphasize diligence and action, such as Proverbs 10:4. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Embrace spiritual disciplines. The best way to fight spiritual sloth is with spiritual work. Commit to a constant habit of prayer, worship, and Bible study. Even if you don't feel like it, making the effort builds spiritual muscle and combats the apathy of the root of sloth. Practical steps. You can fight sloth by changing your habits and behaviors. Take on small responsibilities. To overcome a general laziness, start with small, manageable tasks. Clean your room, do the dishes, take on a small project. Completing those tasks builds a sense of accomplishment and momentum. Create a routine. Regular daily routine can help you overcome the temptation to do nothing. Set a specific time for waking up, working, and resting. Routine provides structure and makes it harder to give in to idleness. Actively pursue virtue. Instead of simply avoiding laziness, actively pursue virtue. Look for opportunities to serve others, learn a new skill, or help in your community. These actions can create a sense of purpose and a healthy alternative to apathy. The punishment of being thrown into a snake pit for the sin of sloth is a metamorphical punishment of Dante's Inferno and other Christian traditions concerning hell. In this depiction, the slothful are cast into a pit of snakes, which represents their spiritual listlessness and apathy. The snakes, which are constant motion, are a counterpoint to the sloth's spiritual laziness, forcing them into a state of perpetual torment. There is no modern equivalent of this punishment, as it's a form of torture. It's not practiced in any legal system. However, the themes of self-inflicted torment and disgust are reflected in some modern concepts. Metamorphical equivalent. The modern equivalent of this punishment is the internal and external destruction that comes from a life of addiction or spiritual emptiness. The snake pit represents a state of being consumed by a violent, destructive habit that brings no joy or satisfaction. This can be an addiction to drugs, alcohol, or even a toxic relationship where the person is trapped in a cycle of suffering and disgust. Psychological analogy. Psychologically, the modern equivalent is the self-inflicted torment of depression and anxiety. A person who suffers from these conditions may feel like they're trapped in a pit of despair, and their thoughts and emotions biting at them, preventing them from taking any action. The snakes are the violent, consuming thoughts that trap a person in a state of paralysis, much like a snake pit would trap a person physically. Sloth. Got to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Got to be devoted, dedicated, or be thrown into a snake pit. Some snake pits get pretty big, especially when everyone's being a sloth. Look at the mass graves in Syria or other places. I don't know if it was because sloths, but it's nothing nice, I guarantee you.